This is my apple pie recipe. I've been using it well over 20 years. I've never had it fail. I have given the recipe to many people and they've come back and said they couldn't get the pastry to taste the way mine does or looks the way mine do. So, and even mine's probably flakier than the one shown in the picture here. And I do have some tricks to what I do, so I thought I'd make this video and I can hand those over, and interested to see how everyone does making the pastry at home following along with the video. I follow the recipe pretty closely. There's just a couple of things, but the main thing before we get into the ingredients is I've never added the lemon. It's just not something I had growing up at home. In Newfoundland, lemons weren't sitting around. And so it's just not something that I've ever felt it was missing from an apple pie. But by all means, try it, see if it adds something that you like. I mean, I do like citrus and other things, but in an apple pie just wasn't what I wanted. But other than that, the three ingredients never change: flour, butter, and water. So here they are, the three ingredients. I use a cake and pastry flour instead of an all-purpose, but definitely try the all-purpose first. It's readily available in the middle of a pandemic, and it's considerably cheaper, so until you get used to it, stick with the all-purpose. Butter, self-explanatory, and chilled water. I fill up a cup, put some ice cubes in it, throw it back in the freezer while I'm mixing the two ingredients, and that's it. So we're back and we've got 3 cups of flour in the bowl, and then I've cut up 1 cup of really cold butter. And it's important to keep it cold. That's the big thing with this. You don't want it to be warm and have it melt or just merge in with the flour. You want to have the flour, but you still want to have small chunks of butter in the flour. And what I do is I cut up the butter just like this, sort of semi cut up into various sections, various sizes, and I throw it in the flour. And some people use like a pastry blender, or some people put it in the food processor. I've seen people put it in, they've actually used multiple butter knives between their fingers, kind of looking like Wolverine going in there. I find the best thing for me is just to use my hands. I kind of get in there and go for it. But you do have to have the butter cold, and I have really cold hands. Like, I'm one of those people that people don't like to shake my hand because they get a shock how cold my hands are. So it works for me just using my hands and getting in there. But if that's not something if you've got really warm hands, maybe buying a pastry blender is the way to go. I just find I hate having more stuff in my kitchen, something I'm only going to use once. And this is just the easiest way for me to do it. And to be honest, I've never had success with the food processor trying to do it. Other people love it. I just find it doesn't work. I don't know if the the motor on my food processor runs too warm, but I just find all I do is squeezing it. So you're just squeezing the butter chunks into smaller chunks covered in flour. But if you have your butter so warm that it blends really well, like too well into your flour, you're going to end up with a shortbread cookie, not a pastry. It's the butter, like it's the little chunks of cold butter that when they hit the hot oven, the moisture in the butter explodes, and that's what gives you that flakiness. So if you don't have any chunks of butter, then you won't have the flakes. You'll basically have a tea biscuit or a shortbread cookie or something of that nature. I mean, still very delicious. I mean, you cannot go wrong with butter and flour mixed together, but you're not gonna have what you think you're gonna have. It's definitely not gonna be that pastry, that flakiness that you're thinking, that you see on TV or any of that nature. And what you want is, you want the butter you want to have some chunks in there that are about the size of a pea. So here you're just blending it. You don't want to have obviously this is too big. You want to kind of have it, squish it a couple of times, little pieces, And you just keep going until it's all about some, you know, you're gonna have different, I know like the recipes always say like it should be consistent, but I kind of like having different like sizes of chunks. It gives a better texture to the pastry. So we've got this blended pretty well. You can kind of see sort of the consistency. There's some pieces that are, you know, the size of a pea, and then, you know, some loose flour. But for the most part, it's pretty well mixed in there with just chunks of butter. When you're doing this with just the butter and the flour, you can kind of work as long as you need to, or as long as you feel comfortable, as long as your butter isn't warming up. There's nothing really happening here at this point in terms of chemistry or anything. You just don't want the butter to warm up. So I try to work fairly quickly, but if you're in a cold kitchen and your hands are cold, keep going as long as you want. So now is when it does become time dependent. We're gonna add the cold water to this. And one thing, that is when you start adding water to flour, that's when you get, you don't wanna, well, not necessarily time, but you don't wanna overwork it. The water and the flour mixed together, that's what's gonna make it, if you overwork that, that's what makes a tough pastry. So you kind of just wanna get in there, pour in your cold water. There's no rhyme or reason, I just kind of pour in that amount. So that's, as you can see, like I've put the water back, so there's actually a ice on the top because I put it back in the freezer. So it's probably half a cup mixed in there at this point. And I just try to get as much of it mixed in together, as you can see. So that's got a lot of flour left, and this is where it kind of gets messy. So I put some more in. Oh, the ice fell in, that's fine. Actually, that works in your favor because it keeps everything cold, and you want the butter to be cold. And as you can see, I just sort of work it in. And that amount of water is what the recipe originally called for. But I find I need more. Like, this is where you've probably, if you followed the recipe, this is where it is. I find I need more water than that to get it to work the way it should. And for me, what happened was I had taken a class, a cooking class actually, and we were making quiche. And I had tried pastry before and could never get it. And while they were making the pastry for the quiche, a light came on what needed to be. And the first was the chunks of butter. And what they had shown was, you kind of, when you mix it, you do need to see, there's the ice. You want to see the chunks of butter in your final product. And then the other thing was, I couldn't get over how wet their ball of dough was. And the way it felt, so as you can see, it's cracking there. So that's a sign that you don't have enough water. The way it felt, and the only way I could describe it was it felt like wet snot. And I was shocked, because that's not how I thought dough should feel like. But as you can see now, you can hear it. It's got a little bit of grossness to it. But that's basically where you're supposed to be. You can see it's shiny. That's how much water you should be adding to your dough. And that's basically as much as you want to work with it, because you are going to have to work with it after, once you start rolling it out. So the next step, you've got your ball, just divide it into two, just get in there and squish it apart. Make 2 balls out of that, and then just stick them in saran wrap and chill for an hour. So we're good now. It's been an hour. I've taken it out of the saran wrap, put it down. You may not be able to see how well, it's the worst with white countertops. You can't see the flour, but you can tell it's well floured here. And you flip it over. Make sure you get some flour on your rolling pan and start rolling. That's all it is. So keep rolling it out and adding more flour as you feel you need to, and sort of move it around. Make sure that it's staying quite... That's why you add extra water in the beginning, because you know you're going to be adding so much flour after. Or at least that's what I think. Now, to get it from here to the pie plate, fold it in a quarter, or half, and then a quarter. Take your pie plate. And there you go. You just have it. That's the first. So I've added the filling. You can go back to the beginning of the video and get the recipe if you want to make an apple pie, but you know, you can fill it with anything. And then I've got the second dough already rolled out, and just lay that on top. Even it out. Cut around the corners, around the edge, crimp it, put an egg wash, put it in the oven per whatever the instructions recipe says, and that's your pie. So we've got it all cut and crimped, just doing an egg wash around it to give it that golden color when it comes out of the oven, and really just some sugar, just a handful. And then finally just cut a few steam slits there, so the apple, the moisture that's evaporating from the apples has a place to go. And it's ready for the oven.